Good evening, chroniclers. Relax, breathe, and listen. What you are about to hear was not made to be understood by everyone. My name is Mara Neicht. In the Order's hierarchy, I am temporal cartographer, though titles mean less and less the longer you carry them, the way colors fade from fabric left too long in sunlight. Age has etched its reminders into me with patient precision. The slowness in my left hand after too many nights, drafting maps no one else would dare read. Fingers cramping around pens that grew heavier with each passing hour. The steadying breath I've learned to take before facing what the younger version of me believed she could master through sheer force of will and enough sleepless nights. Experience teaches caution, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you hesitate before doors you would have thrown open without thought decades ago. Time teaches humility, stripping away the comfortable illusions youth wraps around itself like armor that was never as strong as it seemed. My assignment tonight was unexpected. The Chamber of Broken Hours called me, and that place hasn't spoken to anyone in 17 years. I remember the last time it did. Remember the cartographer who answered that call and never came back quite the same, eyes distant in a way that suggested she'd seen something that changed the shape of her understanding. The chamber lies between timelines, stitched into the Order's foundation, like a scar the Order pretends doesn't ache, doesn't pull when the weather changes or old memories surface. I entered slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understands that haste in places like this invites consequences you can't predict or control, careful not to disturb the fragile equilibrium that keeps this room from collapsing into the temporal chaos it contains. Its walls were lined with suspended hourglass frames, hundreds of them stretching up into darkness, each one shattered but still somehow functional, still pouring streams of glowing dust upward instead of down, in defiance of every natural law. Time in this room behaves like a creature with its own opinions, its own stubborn will, refusing to flow in the direction it's supposed to. As I stepped forward, the floor rippled beneath my boots, a web of fractured obsidian reflecting not just my current form, but fractured versions of myself, possibilities that branched off from choices made or not made over the years. Not reflections of different ages, but of different decisions. A Mara who left the Order when she had the chance, when the door was still open and the weight hadn't yet settled too deep to shake off. A Mara who stayed silent when she should have spoken, who swallowed words that might have changed everything. A Mara who warned too late, who saw the danger and hesitated just long enough for it to become inevitable. It's strange how adulthood multiplies you, scattering the versions of who you were against the versions of who you could have become, until you're surrounded by ghosts of yourself that never quite materialized, but haunt you nonetheless. I approached the central pedestal with measured steps, my breath controlled despite the way my heart had started to beat faster. A thin crack split across its surface, pulsing softly with pale gold light that seemed to breathe in rhythm with something far larger than this room. Beneath the crack lay a map, its edges curling slightly with age, and I recognized it immediately, though I had hoped, genuinely hoped, with the kind of desperate optimism that dies hard even in people like me, never to see it again. Lines of time converged on a single point in the future, pathways from dozens of different timelines, all flowing toward one inevitable moment. A point labeled only with a symbol I'd been seeing in reports and whispered conversations for weeks now. A spiral fractured precisely at its center, the two halves offset just enough to create a sense of wrongness that made your eyes want to look away. The same mark appearing across the Order in places it shouldn't be, in ways that suggested intention rather than accident. I placed my hand on the pedestal, feeling the smooth stone beneath my palm. Warmth spread through my hand, traveling up my wrist and into my forearm. Not comforting warmth, not the gentle heat of a fire or another person's touch, but merely present, merely there. A reminder of a duty that has outlived my ability to escape it, that has grown roots too deep to pull out without tearing something essential in the process. A whisper rose from the room itself, seeming to come from the walls and floor and the very air, low and resonant like a voice speaking from the bottom of a deep well. The breaker has breached the hours. My shoulders tightened automatically, muscles bunching beneath my robes in an old defensive reflex. I'd expected it, had known on some level that this was coming, that the pattern of events over the past months was building toward exactly this moment. But expecting something doesn't soften the moment it becomes real, doesn't dull the impact of suspicion transforming into certainty. Time dust coalesced around me, streams of glowing particles gathering and flowing like water, responding to invisible currents, swirling around my wrists like tightening bracelets, warm and strangely alive against my skin. The room recognized me, knew who I was and what I carried, trusted me perhaps, or perhaps it simply had no one left to turn to, no other options remaining in its narrowing possibilities. The shattered hourglasses trembled in their frames, vibrating with increasing intensity. Dust erupted upward in sudden fountains, spiraling into the center of the chamber, where it coalesced and formed an image suspended in the air. A figure walking through collapsing timelines, each step folding hours into themselves, compressing time like paper being crumpled in an invisible fist. The figure was tall and narrow, moving with terrible purpose. Behind him followed two shifting shadows, elongated and restless, never quite solidifying into fixed forms, but constantly moving, constantly adjusting their shapes. The chamber whispered again, and this time there was something almost apologetic in its tone. "He seeks the map you carry." A weight settled inside my chest, deep behind my sternum. The quiet, heavy kind that adults don't show on their faces, but carry in their bones, in the spaces between breaths, in the way they move through the world. The kind of weight that accumulates slowly over years, until one day you realize you've been carrying it so long, you can't remember what it felt like to stand upright without it. I stepped closer to the map on the pedestal, my shadow falling across its glowing surface. The lines shifted subtly beneath my gaze, as if reconsidering themselves, as if the future was still uncertain enough to be influenced by attention and intention. Because what lay ahead wasn't fixed, wasn't carved in stone or written in permanent ink. It was a convergence, a point where multiple possibilities collapsed into a single outcome, and I was now standing at its threshold, balanced on the edge between what had been and what might be. The chamber dimmed gradually, the light fading until only the map and the floating dust image remained visible, waiting for my choice, for my decision, for whatever action or inaction I would commit to in the next few moments. And I understood with the clarity that comes from years of reading patterns and tracing possibilities. Time wasn't asking me to predict the future, wasn't demanding that I see what was coming and chart it with perfect accuracy. It was demanding that I remember what I'd learned, what I'd seen, what I'd survived. Remember the lessons written in scar tissue and sleepless nights, and choices that couldn't be unmade. The air thickened as I unfurled the map fully, spreading it across the pedestal's surface. Its glow illuminated the uneven lines across my hands, the small scars from years of work with sharp instruments and rougher materials, the way my knuckles had started to swell slightly in cold weather. Age softens many things over time. Ambition that once burned bright and constant, certainty that felt unshakable in youth, patience that seemed infinite until it wasn't. But it sharpens awareness, hones it into something more precise and less forgiving than the broad assumptions of younger years. The lines on the map trembled beneath my gaze, bending inward toward the central fracture, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. I recognized the pattern immediately, had seen variations of it in dozens of temporal collapse scenarios I'd studied over the decades. Timelines collapsing, folding in on themselves, not from natural erosion or the gentle entropy that time usually follows, but from force, from something actively pushing, compressing, crushing the normal flow into shapes it was never meant to take. The breaker had touched the meridian, had left his mark there in ways that were only now becoming clear. Now he was reaching for the hours, extending his influence into this fragile space where time itself was vulnerable and exposed. Dust drifted upward from the shattered hourglasses in lazy spirals, swirling into scenes I had once charted with careful notation and precise measurements. Moments the Order tried to forget. Uncomfortable truths and failures they preferred to bury in archives no one read. Moments I was tasked to archive because someone needed to remember, even if everyone else chose not to. Moments where silence was easier than truth, where speaking up would have cost more than most were willing to pay. Moments that shaped me in ways I still struggle to admit. ways that changed the trajectory of my life, in directions I didn't fully understand until years later, when the consequences had already solidified into permanence. The chamber stirred these memories into visibility without cruelty, without malice or judgment, but without mercy either, without softening the edges or allowing me to look away. One vision hovered directly before me, large enough to block out everything else. My younger self leaning over this same map decades ago, her spine straight and shoulders square, her face unlined and her eyes bright with an intensity I barely recognized now. She was convinced she could outthink fate, convinced that intelligence and dedication and enough sleepless nights could solve any problem, prevent any disaster. Her movements were quick, decisive, each gesture sharp with belief that knowledge equaled control, that understanding meant mastery. Watching that version of myself was painful in a way only adulthood can articulate, painful in a way that youth can't begin to comprehend. Not regret exactly, not the simple wish to go back and change things, and not envy either, not longing for that energy and certainty. Just recognition. Recognition of limits I learned only after crossing them, boundaries I didn't know existed until I'd gone too far past them to turn back. The dust reformed into a thin, bright line, cutting across the room like a horizon dividing earth from sky. Along it appeared the spiral fracture symbol, rendered in that same pale gold light, pulsing steadily, expanding slowly with each pulse, growing larger and more defined. A quiet voice formed beneath it, seeming to rise from the floor itself. He has marked the hours with his intent. I ran my fingers along the glowing map, feeling the slight warmth of the light against my skin. The future pathways flickered under my touch, unstable and uncertain. Some collapsed entirely as I watched, disappearing into nothing as if they'd never existed. Some bent around invisible pressure points, curving away from the fracture symbol. Some twisted into knotwork too complex for any single scribe to decipher alone, patterns that would require teams of cartographers working for months to fully understand. "You want me to redraw the future," I murmured, speaking to the chamber or perhaps just thinking aloud, giving voice to the understanding that was forming. The chamber replied with that same quiet resonance. "We want you to accept what you already know." The statement landed heavier than any command would have, heavier than any order or threat. Because acceptance is harder than obedience, requires more courage than following instructions. I closed my eyes and let the room's pulsing quiet settle into my ribs, into the spaces between my heartbeats, into the rhythm of my breathing. In my work, I've learned that acceptance rarely means surrender, rarely means giving up or giving in. It often means seeing clearly what we already suspected, but lacked the courage to name, lacked the willingness to acknowledge, because acknowledging makes it real in ways suspicion never quite does. When I opened my eyes again, the map glowed brighter, its light intensifying until I had to squint slightly. New paths emerged across its surface, thin and trembling like spider silk in wind, barely visible against the background glow. Not predictions, not fixed outcomes carved in certainty, possibilities. Branches that might or might not bear fruit depending on choices not yet made. The breaker's symbol hovered over one path like a dark sun, the darkest path, the narrowest, the one leading directly into a collapsing horizon where all the timeline convergences seemed to end. But another path branched subtly away from that darkness, diverging at an angle so slight I almost missed it. A deviation too small to notice without the burden of many years spent reading these fractures, learning to see the tiny differences that distinguish disaster from near miss. One that led not away from the danger in some dramatic escape, but around it, skirting the edges in a narrow corridor of possibility that required precision to navigate. The chamber whispered with something that might have been hope. "He will follow the wrong path if you redraw it." So a simple task on paper, a straightforward instruction that could be written in a single sentence, a monumental one in consequence, in the weight of what it meant and what would follow from it. Time dust coiled up my arms like living vines, wrapping around my forearms and wrists, steadying my hands. The kind of steadiness experience teaches over decades of practice and failure. Not confidence, not the bright certainty of youth, but clarity. The ability to see what needs to be done and do it despite the trembling in your hands and the doubt in your mind. I dipped the pen into the ink basin, watching the way the liquid clung to the nib, and I began to redraw the hour line, adding subtle alterations to the existing pattern. 3 strokes, each one deliberate and precise. One fracture turned slightly off its axis, rotated by a degree so small most observers wouldn't notice the change. A misdirection woven directly into the blueprint of time itself. A lie told in the language of inevitability. My chest tightened as I completed the final stroke, the feeling not sharp or sudden, but gradual and pervasive. Not fear, not the panic of immediate danger. Responsibility aging into something quieter, deeper, more permanent, a feeling adults understand intimately, know in their bones. That every small decision echoes through years we haven't lived yet, ripples outward in ways we can't predict or control, shapes futures we'll never see, but are responsible for nonetheless. The chamber glowed with what felt like cautious approval, its light warming slightly, but the air shifted suddenly, the temperature dropping in an instant. A cold pressure pressed into the back of my neck, raising goosebumps along my spine. I didn't need to turn around to know what was behind me. A shadow formed, growing darker and more solid with each passing second. Long and narrow, splitting cleanly at its center like a reflection in cracked glass. One of the breaker's echoes, drawn by the alteration I'd just made. Time dust recoiled from it immediately, pulling away like water from oil, refusing to touch it. I gripped the map tighter, my fingers pressing hard enough to leave impressions in the parchment. And I waited, breathing slowly and evenly, for the world to tilt in whatever direction it was going to tilt. The shadow leaned closer, and I could feel its presence bending the room around it, like heat warping metal, distorting the straight lines of reality into curves and angles that shouldn't exist. It didn't move violently, didn't lunge or strike. It didn't need to. Its very existence disrupted the careful structure of the chamber, creating small temporal distortions that rippled outward from its form. The hourglasses trembled in their frames, their contents spilling erratically, time dust falling in patterns that made no sense, defying the careful order the room usually maintained. My breath deepened, not out of fear but discipline, the kind of controlled breathing I'd practiced for years until it became automatic, a reflex more reliable than thought. When you've lived long enough with responsibilities that don't forgive mistakes, with duties where a single error can cascade into catastrophe, you learn to steady yourself when steadiness seems impossible. When every instinct screams to run or fight or freeze. The shadow tilted its fractured head, the movement eerily precise, studying the map in my hands with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. It didn't speak. The breaker's echoes never do, lack whatever mechanism produces sound or language. They observe with patient attention. They wait for inevitabilities, for the outcomes they believe are already written. The chamber whispered urgently, its voice taking on a tone I'd never heard from it before, something almost like alarm. He feels the shift. He knows you redrew the path. The shadow extended a thin limb toward me, the appendage stretching with fluid grace. The fractured line across its form pulsed with faint light, purposeful and deliberate. I stepped aside, not quickly or dramatically, not with the flashy evasion of youth, simply enough to avoid its touch, moving just far enough that the reaching limb passed through empty air where I'd been standing a moment before. I pressed my palm flat against the pedestal, putting my full weight into the contact, and the chamber responded immediately as if it had been waiting for exactly this signal. The floor brightened dramatically, light blazing up from beneath the obsidian surface, revealing a second map underneath the first, one I had drawn many years ago when I was younger and more ambitious, when I still believed I could map every possible future if I just worked hard enough and lived long enough and refused to give up. The two maps overlapped now, their lines intersecting and merging, creating patterns within patterns. Time readjusted around the convergence, the room's temporal flow shifting and realigning. The fracture I'd just drawn aligned perfectly with my new diversion, the altered path matching the old projection in ways that made the lie seem like truth, made the misdirection appear inevitable. The shadow recoiled, its form pulling back suddenly. It understood what had happened, recognized the trap even as it closed. Not fear, These things don't feel fear the way living beings do. Not confusion exactly, recognition. Understanding that it had been outmaneuvered, that the certainty it had been following was false. And behind that recognition came intent, cold and implacable, the determination to correct the error and restore what it believed was the proper course. The chamber darkened in response, not from threat but from concentration, from the immense effort of what it was doing. The hourglasses reversed their flow all at once, dust spiraling downward instead of up for the first time since I'd entered, falling like threads, stitching an invisible fabric back together. The room reshaped itself around me, reality bending to accommodate new parameters, walls curving, bending inward, ground shifting beneath my feet in subtle ways, the pedestal rising like a tower made of pure light and compressed memory, lifting me upward. I stepped up onto it as it rose, my balance adjusting automatically to the movement. It felt like standing inside a heartbeat, like being at the exact center of something vast and alive, feeling its rhythm pulse through every cell of my body. The chamber whispered with a gravity I had never heard from it in all my years of working within its walls, a weight and solemnity that suggested finality. You have changed what he believes is his destination. My hands trembled slightly as I held the map, a fine tremor running through my fingers. Not weakness, not the shaking of fear or exhaustion. Awareness, recognition of what I'd done and what it meant, the full weight of consequence settling onto my shoulders. Because altering the breaker's path would not stop him, wouldn't end his pursuit or eliminate the threat he represented. It would only delay him, buy time that would eventually run out, redirect him toward a target that wasn't quite where he thought it was. And that is sometimes the most we can do, the only victory available in situations where complete triumph is impossible. Not prevent the storm from coming, not stop it entirely, but shift where it makes landfall. Control the angle of impact, minimize the damage in ways that matter, even if they don't feel heroic. I unrolled the map again, spreading it fully across the rising pedestal. The new timeline I'd drawn pulsed faintly with its own light, barely noticeable, unless you had lived long enough to understand that the smallest lines often define the largest outcomes, that the subtle alterations shape futures more dramatically than the obvious dramatic changes. The shadow stepped forward, its form solidifying, becoming more defined and purposeful. It pressed one fractured limb directly onto the map, touching the altered path I'd created. Time stuttered around the point of contact, skipping like a heart missing a beat. Every hourglass in the chamber shattered at once, not with sound but silently, like glass remembering how to break, like fragility finally achieving its inevitable conclusion. Fragments hung suspended in the air for a long moment before beginning to fall in slow motion. The chamber trembled violently, then stilled completely, all movement ceasing as if the room itself was holding its breath. The shadow collapsed into dust, its form disintegrating rapidly, breaking apart into thousands of particles that drifted slowly downward. Its purpose was complete, its task finished. It had confirmed the path, had verified what it needed to verify, and now it could return to whatever void had spawned it. The chamber whispered one final message, quiet but clear. He will follow what you have drawn. For now, I stepped down from the pedestal as it slowly descended back to floor level, my legs adjusting to solid ground again. My bones ached in familiar ways, the deep aches that settle into joints and never quite leave, the kind that come from years of carrying truths too dense to share, too heavy to put down. The aches that are constant companions in middle age and beyond, reminders of time passing and bodies aging. But for once, standing there in the settling dust and fading light, the ache felt bearable, felt like something I could live with. Because even if the world was still breaking, even if the danger hadn't passed and the threat remained real, I had shifted the fracture by a margin only time itself understood, had bought breathing room measured in moments that might add up to something meaningful. I rolled the map carefully, precisely, treating it with the respect it deserved. I held it against my chest, feeling its warmth seep through my robes and into my skin, and whispered into the settling quiet, "I'll be here when the next cycle comes." Because that's what we do, those of us who've lasted this long, who've survived this many rotations. We show up again, we stand our ground, we do what we can with what we have. The chamber dimmed with quiet acceptance, its light fading gradually to a soft glow, acknowledging my promise and my burden. And I walked back into the corridors of the Order, my footsteps echoing softly in the silence, the map warm beneath my hand, a future altered, however slightly, a disaster postponed, a possibility preserved. Not salvation, not victory in any grand sense, just continuation, just another day bought at whatever cost was required.